Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com, and it is time for another news Roundup podcast episode. I am joined, as usual, by our assistant editor, Eamon McCarthy-Earls. Hey, Eamon, welcome back.
Thanks, Jason. Glad to be here.
All right. Glad to have you here, and glad to jump into this one. We can really cover, a lot of ground in the next few minutes here, looking at our recent coverage and perhaps a quick look at what lays ahead. This episode is sponsored by McCorma. McCorma Enhanced Electronic Payments offers a new way to streamline the payment process in Dynamics GP. The service is free for qualified clients and includes implementation, vendor enrollment, and ongoing support for you and your vendors. There's no commitment required. To find out if you qualify, visit www.mccorma.com to start the process or schedule a discovery meeting today. So where are we going to begin today?
Well, I know one of the things that we've seen quite a bit of discussion about the past month or so is some of the Power Apps portals, questions about licensing and so forth, which we've done a lot of great coverage on over the past few weeks, looking at what licensing is going to look like for portals, especially as we head into Wave 2 in October.
Portals, and I'm going to extend that because I know we also had in mind to talk about Power Platform, APIs, and other D365 customer engagement related things. And it's funny, it's sort of all starting to blend together into what is apparently coming together as the new licensing strategy for all these products. I'm going to just hit on it quickly here because we have, I think at this point, 5, 6, 7 articles all talking about it, but it's sort of an evolving and like we said, sort of interwoven story right now, all sort of heading toward the October release wave and changes that will be implemented in conjunction with that sort of timing. There was clarification in a couple of ways recently that probably are the top things to note. First, there was information that was shared by Microsoft Program Manager Dilip Singh about portals on a podcast hosted by a couple of Microsoft MVPs. This is really becoming a bit more of a pattern here where Microsoft officials kind of chat with MVPs and tell them things that sort of aren't already communicated super clearly in their own sort of official information. So anyway, Dilip was sort of rehashing or reviewing the portals approach, and he illuminated a couple things that I didn't know, and I think most people sort of are a little unclear on. One is why everything's prepay, and he said that's to better align with the sales motion for Office 365. In other words, the idea that people want to know what they're going to be spending ahead of time. They don't want to be charged, for consumption based, after the fact, and find out that they just, used up a huge number of logins or something like that, or sessions, and they owe a big bill the next month for what they just used. So that's sort of the thinking, and that the sales team wants to sell it that way, and that's how companies want to consume portals. The other thing was a tiered approach, and the mentality behind that with consumption-based pricing and a tiered approach, Microsoft's view is that this won't sort of adversely affect the pricing of the cost of portals for existing customers. There are thousands of portals out there already. And the thing that really wasn't addressed was, well, there will be some percentage that really are adversely affected, and how will that affect them? But that's, I think that's something that Microsoft's presumably going to work out. And I think a lot of the messages, don't sweat it, we'll work this out, sort of. It seems to sort of be we don't have an answer for every single person, every single scenario on a podcast or in an interview, and companies are just going to have to talk to Microsoft, talk to their partners, and work something out. They won't be shutting down portals when you do exceed the number of sort of sessions you've purchased or the number of page views you've purchased, and that they will be giving tools to monitor and manage and predict how much consumption you need to prepay on. This is one of those things that if this was sort of explained up front, that this is the approach, that you will have these tools and this predictive ability, and that's how you're going to be paying in the future, and you won't get shut down if you exceed it, that probably would have put people's mind at ease more. But that's not exactly how this has all rolled out. So anyway, I listened to that podcast. I wrote up what I thought some of the highlights of it were, and there's a link to it obviously in our piece. But you can hear more from a key representative of the Portals product team in that one, and then the other main reporting on this topic, both portals and some of the API related consumption based questions, were answered in a piece that we did with some direct answers from a Microsoft spokesperson, not attributed to one person there. And that got into again more of some of this uncertainty around what does prepay really mean, what will happen if you go past your API usage, what will happen if you buy more, if you prepay for more than you can use in a month on the portal side, because it's sort of a monthly pay by month kind of a thing. So if you buy more, sessions than you actually use, do you just lose that money, or does it? And there's sort of an answer to that. If you're on an EA, it's probably not an issue. They'll sort of do a true up or something at the end of the year. It's not clear if you're not on an EA, like if you're just on CSP, what happens. But again, it's part of the new world that Microsoft wants the customers to sort of operate within. And the only thing I can really guess with certainty is that there is more evolution coming to all of this. The whole story is not out. They seem to be listening to MVPs who are commenting on it. They seem to be, I'm sure they'll listen to their big and important customers on this as time goes as well. The only other thing I would add is that I think they also have lots of telemetry already about usage of customer experience apps, usage of APIs, usage of portals, and you'd have to think that these changes are geared toward not sort of adversely impacting the vast majority of the known use cases for this kind of content. I'm sorry, for these kinds of apps. I'll also post it with this podcast. I'll post a PowerPoint I just put together. I did a little talk at a CRM UG chapter meeting, sort of at spur of the moment, a day or two ago, and it kind of encapsulates a lot of these topics and some of the links back to the coverage we've done. I think it might be a handy thing for people to take a look at if they feel like it.
I think certainly as we go forward, we'll probably see more kind of pricing models like this. At least that's my suspicion, as many people look for reliability in the SaaS and cloud era and don't want unpredictable costs. As we look ahead to the fall as well, there'll be a big event coming up in Vienna, Austria, which I believe you're planning to attend, the Directions EMEA 2019 event.
That's right. So, MSDW is a media sponsor at that event, which we're very excited for, and we sort of kicked that off with an interview with a couple of members of the organizing committee who just talked to us a little bit about the themes that they expect at the event and sort of the nature of Directions EMEA. It's a long-running event with a real sort of deep history, and people who committee members and attendees who've been showing up at this event for many years, and it's also beginning to attract some new types of audiences who are attending, Microsoft partners with other product area focuses, accounting firms that haven't previously sold ERP or previously sold Business Central. So that in combination with the fact that this October release is very significant for the product itself. It should be an interesting place to be, and hopefully we'll have at least a little bit more pre-event coverage before it kicks off on October 9th.
Well, speaking of releases, we did a couple pieces of coverage. One on the upcoming Wave 2 preview, or actually the preview that's currently available for the upcoming release of Business Central and its Wave 2 release, as well as the Dynamics GP update for October. Do you have a sense of what the sort of significant takeaways are for both of those announcements for users?
Well, I think with release Wave 2, I think with something like Business Central, there could be some surprises still to come about what else is part of release Wave 2. But for everything that's known, at least, it shouldn't be much of a surprise there. Other than knowing that preview is available will give, with only a small delta between the preview and the final released the release package for release wave 2, it gives different interested groups the chance to work with it. ISVs or partners with customizations on it, system administrators who want to re-verify their own systems. So that's something that I assume a lot of people are really jumping on to get access to, spinning up a sandbox, applying it against their own configuration, their own customizations and add-ons, and so it's significant in that sense. Hope to do a little more coverage of that too before it launches. Yeah. So that was the Business Central, and I guess it's available through the Business Central Admin Center if you're an existing customer or have an existing instance of the product.
And in terms of GP, it's interesting because the release that's coming out in October is being referred to as GP Next. Evidently 40 different new features and enhancements. So definitely some big changes for GP as well, for even those pursuing more of a traditional path with their Dynamics implementations.
Yeah, GP Next I think is maybe not the official term. I think it's just sort of the nickname that people give for it when it does come out. But there are some important changes. First of all, it's good to know there is a new version. I think 40 or so new features, and it sounds like they're going to sort of drop the sort of year name, putting the year in the name of the version, and it'll just be Dynamics GP, with sort of updates, annually or periodically, and it'll abide by the same modern lifecycle policy that Office 365, Dynamics 365 follow, which relates to sort of customers' access to the product and Microsoft's promise to support it over time. I don't know all. I have to admit, I don't probably have a perfect grasp of all of that significance of that, of applying that same policy to a legacy product like GP compared to a cloud product like Business Central. But the response I heard from people seemed to be favorable, that Microsoft's are bringing GP into the fold in that regard. I think people were. I think there's still more to be learned about what the actual plans are for this release of GP, as well as future releases. I heard there were some NDA discussions when this was sort of revealed to partners at the GP Tech conference a couple weeks ago, and I also think it's notable that Microsoft basically said nothing publicly about this release. All that came out about that I could find was tweets from people who attended the that GP event in Fargo at Microsoft's offices, and sort of took screenshots of what was on the what was being presented, and blogged about it themselves, tweeted about it themselves. So not really a strong. Really not a show of strength on Microsoft's part by any means, which is again kind of a shame, and really not. They really could do a little more than that.
And it does seem like to some degree that they're continuing to de-emphasize Dynamics GP as things go along, but it's interesting that they're continuing to have the same nomenclature for it instead of repositioning it as something like a Business Central.
Well, that's part of the point, that they're not going to reposition it. It is sort of firmly a legacy product, but I think they've gone way too far into almost not acknowledging it, which is really a mistake. I mean, it's a product and a customer base and a partner base that has so much value and so much wisdom and knowledge and expertise and spending power. I mean, they still, at this point at least, bring in a lot of revenue on maintenance for GP, although that might start to fall off. But I think nurturing that group, that all aspects of it, from the partner side, from the customer side, is I'd hate to see them take that for granted. And it just feels like it's almost it's sort of being sidelined just administratively, by you just take resources off of the product, you take resources away from marketing it, you take resources away from partner management, and what you're left with is a product that's really at risk of if it's not if it's not sort of given a little bit more of a helping hand, or a little bit more support, and without, and that happens. I think I've talked about this before, but that can sort of happen without any sort of ill will, just pulling resources. So I think it's good that the next release is out there. I think it'll be really interesting to see sort of how the GP to Business Central migration paths evolve and how some of these partners that are really GP focused start to adapt more. I know a lot of them have, but that's an ongoing story, and that'll be interesting to watch.
Well, apart from our coverage of some of the upcoming Wave 2 announcements, you also had a chance to speak with Miro Pomsar. He's the new CEO of Resco. And tell me a little bit more about that conversation. It sounded like a very interesting one.
Yeah, he gave an interview after taking over the role of CEO after being CTO, and I recommend people take a look at it. I asked him about sort of the company's strategic direction, the things he's prioritizing as the overall leader of the company, as opposed to just being the technical leader. And he identified some really critical things around the product line, around sort of their channel and their partner relationships. It's a company that has some goals beyond. People tend to think of them in the Dynamics CRM customer experience space as as providing a mobile app for field service and so forth. But obviously, they do a lot more. They offer a lot more, and with a new leader, it'll be interesting to see if and how their direction evolves at all.
We were also very lucky recently to have Eric Hogard on our MSDW podcast episode a couple weeks back. And Eric is a Microsoft MVP, and he recently came out with a new book, Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central Field Guide. And as the name suggests, he touches on a lot of very interesting stuff related to getting started with Business Central, particularly for those that are new to Business Central. Some of the things being the complicated definitions for things like intelligent cloud and some of the tooling within Business Central, and really just getting users to think more about being in sort of a cloud-first world. So very interesting having him on the podcast, and certainly it'll be interesting to see what the response is to his book over the coming months and any feedback he gets for future updates to it.
Yeah, we have both a podcast and an article on that, so check those out.
Well, of course, we're always focusing on new content from experts, and certainly one of the pieces that received some tremendous feedback over the past month was an article by Kirk Donahoe. Kirk is an expert on all things data warehouses through his work with MCA. And he shared with us some of the changes that are going on as really Microsoft begins this transition for users from Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 1 and the bring your own data warehouse approach to Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2, and what that means, as well as the more complicated aspects of accessing and moving data from Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations as opposed to older AX instances.
Yeah, this was we have both an article and a related podcast we did with Kirk, and like you said, definitely a lot of interest in this topic and where Microsoft's going with it. The podcast was one of the more technically challenging ones I think we've hosted, just because it is a tricky topic. There's a lot of ins and outs. I know we're going to be doing more on this topic in the future. I think the Azure Data Lake Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 or ADLS Gen 2 is really cool stuff. It sounds like Microsoft has a plan to roll it out, so people will be in the F&O space will be becoming more familiar with it, I'm sure, and their partners will too. The impact will vary from customer to customer based on their data reporting and data warehouse strategies. So, glad to point it out. I'm a little afraid to to dive into it in any more detail than that, though.
We've also been very lucky to have cloud architect Tracy Rooks writing for us. He's very, very knowledgeable about working with Azure in context of other clouds, and he's been presenting some very interesting thinking on cloud architectures and what you need to know about them, and really how to decide where to host particular workloads, whether in Azure or in AWS or Google Cloud, or really a combination of all of them. And so in his series of articles, he's been looking at cloud architecture as a whole, some of the similarities between the different clouds, many of the different security features, things like security certificates, key vaults, and so forth. And I, for one, am very excited about a new piece that he's coming out with either this week or next week, looking at messaging queues and publication subscribe, otherwise known as pub-sub architectures, which are very, very important for managing very distributed cloud workloads.
Yeah, he puts these kind of complex architectural topics in a very readable and understandable format, which is great for people who aren't enterprise solution architects. And these are consequential decisions that companies are making, whether it's in relation to their core ERP and CRM and HR and systems like that, or whether they're building a totally bespoke solution, that pulls in legacy data or whatever. These are important decisions. There's a lot of choices to make. So I think it's really perfect timing to see some of these issues sort of brought up and having Tracy write about them on our site. I agree.
Jason, you had a chance to work very closely with Heidi Newhauser, looking at change management, as well as with Everett Buss on manufacturing execution and advanced warehousing topics related to Dynamics 365. Could you mention a little bit about those two expert articles?
Yeah, for sure. So Heidi Newhauser has written actually a couple pieces for us, and hopefully we'll have her back. She really does a lot of thinking around user adoption as it relates to CRM and to D365 customer engagement in particular. So she's written a couple pieces on best practices and change management. Best practices for change process and for in the context of projects. So we'll link to those, and I recommend you check them out. And same with Everett Buss. He has if you're in the AX or F&O space and you deal with supply chain or you deal with manufacturing, you really ought to know Everett and his writing. His most recent piece is on manufacturing execution functionality, and it really goes deep. It's an advanced topic, but it's gotten great. It's had great traction on our site as well.
I'm also very happy to say that some of our contributors from CloudFront, an Indian-based technology firm, including Kuldeep Gupta, wrote some great pieces for us bridging the gap between Flow and Dynamics 365 Project Service Automation that I really encourage anyone that's working with PSA or with Flow to go ahead and check out, because those are very, very helpful tips for that branch of the D365 family.
Yeah, I've learned just how many ways there are to sort of add automation to PSA and really kind of configure it to the business processes. Seem so key in that. Coming at it as not a project service expert by any means, but just seeing all the ways that those processes can be optimized. And yeah, just to also just call out on the same note with Flow is a new Flows from the Field that just went up that you compiled, Eamon, and that has even more new flows in the context of Microsoft Business Applications.
And it's always fascinating to see what kind of flows people are coming up with. In this particular Flows from the Field, I took a look at a range of different options, including creating automated HTML reports, moving attachments from Dynamics 365 to either Azure Files or to SharePoint, as well as processes that involve creating PDFs and much more.
All right, excellent. Well, I think we're about ready to wrap up this episode. Eamon, what do you have coming up in the future?
Well, as we look ahead to the coming weeks, I'm very excited to do some coverage of Wave 2 as it actually hits the ground as we head into October. And I've got some very interesting topics coming up on the Azure front as well, as we continue to expand our coverage on Azure. So waiting to hear back on a few very interesting leads, but I hope to have some particularly intriguing features in the Azure space coming out soon, as well as the publication subscribe messaging queues article from Tracy Rooks, which I'm very excited to get out to our readers.
All right. For me, I have, I'm looking ahead to both of the events we mentioned earlier, both Summit and Directions EMEA. I'm also on the lookout for, I think there will be some other related announcements coming from Microsoft as this October release wave finally happens, and we see both the review, both sort of full announcements on things that are out, and perhaps a few new things as well that Microsoft has said that in the past, that they put what they already acknowledge into the release wave documents and preview documents, but then they also sort of reserve the right to reveal a couple things to make a little news around those two. So I'll be looking for that, and just more coverage of things around the business application space on the partner side, as it relates to sort of partner programs, as well as the product side. So probably a real range of new things coming up. All right, well, Eamon, it's been fun doing another roundup like this with you. I'm sure we'll be putting another one together soon to see what lies next. Thanks for being here with me.
A pleasure as always, Jason.
All right, and this has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. Thanks for listening. You can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.